Good evening, friends. So we are here once again back with another Usanas dialogue after a long hiatus because I was traveling and we were having our own other events. Eh, Today we are going to discuss a very critical question. Is Mr. Donald Trump going to solve the Russia-Ukraine problem, Russia-Ukraine conflict? We have been wondering for a long time that what Donald Trump's presidential policies would be regarding this major conflict, which has been, occupying our attention and all the discussions in the think tank community, strategic community since 2022. So it's again $1 million question that whether he'll be able to address this conflict or at least find some common ground where both Russians and Ukrainians can agree and some sort of a modus vivendi can be found out. Today, we are joined by an eminent panel of speakers and very distinguished experts in this subject. So we have Ambassador Pankaj Saran here, who is going to deliver special remarks and then he will chair the session. Ambassador Pankaj Saran is a former diplomat with 40 years of experience in foreign, strategic, and national security affairs. He has served in key positions within the Government of India in the Prime Minister's Office, National Security Council Secretariat, the Ministry of External Affairs, and in the several Indian missions abroad. He has served as India's ambassador to Russia and India's High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and as the head of the Northern Division in the Ministry of External Affairs, dealing with Nepal and Bhutan. He also served as the Deputy National Security Advisor. Currently, he is the convener of NatStrat. Among the speakers, we have with us Omer Niazi. Omer Niazi is a research assistant at Harvard Belfer Center's Middle East Initiative and a U.S. State Department MEI Black Sea Fellow at Middle East Institute. He is also a policy fellow at the Fund for Constitutional Government and the founder and chair of the Council on International Law, Order and Security. With over 88 years of experience in international security, conflict resolution, and governance, Omer was previously a Mason Public Policy Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. Then we have Natalia Butriska. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Natalia? Okay. Natalia is an affiliated expert, Global Outreach Program at Ukrainian Prism Foreign Policy Council. She is the author of over 100 analytical articles on international relations, focusing on the Asia-Pacific region. Her expertise includes geopolitics, the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on Ukraine's relations with Asian countries, and China's global influence. Natalia has contributed to outlets like the Mirror of the Week, BBC, and others. Then we have Marian Duris, who has also been to Usanas events earlier. Marian Duris is a foreign policy expert and advisor at the European Parliament, specializing in international relations and policy analysis. He tracks the legislative process, European Commission initiatives, and committee trends that impact institutional operations. With experience in the security and international relations sectors in the United Kingdom, Marian advises members of the European Parliament. Then we have Dr. Sergei Markijanov, who would be joining at 6, like after after almost 45-50 minutes, because he's slightly occupied. Dr. Sergei Markijanov is a leading researcher at the Institute of International Studies at McGill University and an expert at the Russian International Affairs Council and a Gorchakov Public Diplomacy Fund. He has also served as visiting fellow at the Russia and Central Asia program at Fudan University, Shanghai, and as a visiting lecturer at the Center for Central Eurasian Studies at the University of Mumbai and German Council on Foreign Relations. Then we have Dr. Benjamin Pogosyan. Dr. Benjamin has also joined Usanas programs earlier, and Dr. Benjamin Pogosyan is the director of the Center for Political and Economic Strategic Studies in Yerevan and a senior research fellow at Armenia's Applied Policy Research Institute. So we have this amazing panel of speakers with us today, and I believe that this discussion is going to be very exciting and very engaging. Before I begin the discussion, I would like to invite Ambassador Pankaj Saran to deliver his special remarks and then chair the session. Ambassador Saran, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Abhinav. It's a great pleasure to be back with you at the Usanas Foundation, and I want to also congratulate you for hosting this discussion, and I also want to welcome all the other participants from across the world who are with us, and I really hope that at the end of the discussion, we have a better sense, if possible, of where we are headed. The question that you have, so I will speak for about 10 minutes and then I think we can enter into discussions. And unfortunately, as I mentioned to you, I might have to leave at 6 o'clock. To begin with, the question that we are discussing is, will Trump end the Russia-Ukraine war? I think yes, the answer is I think he will. The question is of a different kind, and I want to begin this session by posing a few of these questions because I think at this point in time, we have more questions than we have answers. So let me throw up a few questions for the benefit of the panelists and also for helping us to focus our thoughts on the discussion. Look, the first point is that, as we all know, and there are accomplished experts on the panel, all wars have to end one way or the other. Even the Cold War had ended. The question is whether we are able to, and whether we should, and whether we must differentiate between war and conflict. It is not necessary that the end of a war signifies the end of a conflict. And the best proof of this, I think, is the Ukraine conflict or the war itself. The Cold War had ended in 1991, but the conflict obviously has continued between the East and the West 30 years after that. So, with this, I would say, in my opinion, whatever little we have seen of Donald Trump as a presidential candidate and as some of his statements as the president-elect and his track record in his first term as the president, I think it is reasonable that we can deduce some elements of his policies and approaches, not just to Ukraine, but to Russia, to China, and of course to what kind of a role he visualizes America to play in the world. So, the first point I want to make is I personally believe that he will go all out to end the war, but he cannot do it alone, and he certainly cannot do it without the help of President Putin. So, if you want to find a solution, if you want to put an end, you must have the protagonists also ready and willing, or if they're neither ready nor willing, you must have the capability to compel them or to exert enough pressure on them that they will fall in line in terms of putting a halt. So, what are the issues and what are the things we need to watch out for from now till January 20th and thereafter, both in terms of public remarks, in terms of signs of quiet diplomacy, and any other signs that we can see, the tea leaves that we can see and that we can discern. And I think it's important because we saw certain policies and a certain dispensation in the Trumpian worldview from 2016 to 20. We certainly saw many public remarks by him as a candidate during the course of the US elections on Russia, on Ukraine, and he minced no words about where he stood and what he thought of the war. And now we are seeing some further remarks by him as the president-elect. I mean, in the last few weeks, we are seeing interesting developments, such as, for example, I would say the phone call by Chancellor Scholz to President Putin a few weeks ago, and more recently, the visit of the president-elect to Paris for his meeting with both President Macron and President Zelensky. What we also, I think, he should keep in mind is to differentiate what we wish for and what is possible and what we need. So, as India, as part of the global community, there are obviously outcomes that we wish for, but the question is, can they be attained? And more importantly, what is it that we need today? When we talk of ending, and I'm using this word loosely, the conflict or the war, the question which we have to face and confront is what are the terms going to be of that ending of the war? What will be the manner in which it will happen? What kind of a settlement will we have? Will it endure? Now, again, history has taught us, and that's been the story of wars and the whole question of how nations um, interact with each other and deal with each other, is that we have settlements which are honorable, we have settlements which are not endured because they are one-sided, and they have a huge element of humiliation, and therefore they come back to haunt us and bite us in due course of time. So the question actually, which is more important than will he end or whether he wishes to end, is what would be the kind of conditions and what would be the terms on which we will see this end, and what kind of a whether whatever settlement we have is going to endure for now, and let's say for the foreseeable 1 or 2 decades, if not more. The other question which I think we should look at also is what is the time frame of ending this conflict or the war? How much time is it going to take? My own view is that this is probably going to be his first foreign policy priority because of his track record, as I said, of all the statements he has made. But the question is, how much time will it take? In my own view, I think everyone expects very rapid movement in the first few months of his presidency. And not least, I think President Putin himself is waiting for the change in the White House. And so 2025, I would suspect, could be a defining moment, just as 2022 was, and maybe, who knows, just as 1989 or 1991 was, where if we recollect, those of us who lived through the Cold War actually never could visualize the manner in which it ended. It ended abruptly, and it was a product basically of political leaderships emerging on both sides of the Iron Curtain. You had Ronald Reagan, you had Mikhail Gorbachev, and it was the people and the leaders who actually wrested the initiative and took charge of what was an absolutely impossible situation, which had completely overtaken the global landscape. The other question, I think, which also needs to be looked at is what would be the impact of any settlement on the stakeholders? And by this, I mean, first and foremost, the NATO alliance itself, the transatlantic alliance, that is the balance between America and Europe. What would it mean for the future of the European Union and for European unity and integration? And then there are other stakeholders, not least China and of course the global south. So what will be the impact on all of these different stakeholders? And naturally, everyone's going to count their losses and they're going to count their gains. I mean, who is going to and how will everyone try to extract or protect their vital interests in such a settlement? I mean, for example, what would it mean for the global south? As I said, what would it mean for global stability? So these are some questions which I think are relevant to the discussion, and I'm sure everyone on the panel has thought about all these issues. They are not new issues, but it's just that it'll enable us to focus on all of them. I will end just with a few reflections before I conclude and open the floor. Clearly, if we go by how other people are reacting, we get a sense of what is coming in the future. And I was in Europe a few weeks ago, and I distinctly felt a very heightened degree of concern in Europe over President-elect Trump's pronouncements on the war, his intentions to end, what it would mean for Ukraine, what it would mean for European security, and what it would mean for how Europe and Russia live or do not live together. So that indicated to me that they see that something is going to happen. It's not a question of if, but a question of when and how. Insofar as India is concerned, clearly it's quite remarkable that we are at a juncture of global politics and history where it is Europe and together with West Asia, which are in the throes of turmoil and conflict. And ironically, it is the Indo-Pacific region which looks more tranquil today. It is possible that the tranquility uh, is a kind of under the radar, or it is does not reflect the true tensions that are there. But nevertheless, the fact is that the Indo-Pacific region is today looking and appearing, at least on the surface, a more organized geography of the world. But these are just some thoughts, and with these, I will conclude by only saying I look forward to the discussion uh, and to some of the more detailed presentations and views. And I hope that Usanas Foundation can, through such dialogue, help to crystallize views and also help to project how India views such conflicts and such difficulties that we face, because insofar as India is concerned, I think our position has been fairly consistent since the first day, that we see that there is no other alternative but to dialogue, diplomacy, and a peaceful settlement to end this, because we don't see any other way in which this can end. Um, and everyone is suffering. Obviously, the protagonists, the parties themselves, but even countries like India and the global south are suffering hugely. And therefore, I think India would be in the forefront of any attempt and would be supportive of any attempt to bring this to a closure. I am actually not sure whether under President Trump he needs anyone's help, because he seems to have very clear ideas about what is needs to be done and how is to be done. So with these remarks, let me conclude, and I therefore now open the floor for discussion. And I would like to call upon Mr. Benjamin Pogosyan to open the discussion, because I understand he has to leave. So, Mr. Pogosyan, would you like to come in? And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, I would like to thank Usanas Foundation and Mr. Abhinav for organizing this timely, interesting discussion and also for invitation. I was supposed to leave, but another discussion was cancelled, so I'm happy to be here for all discussion. And my short thoughts about what may happen under President Trump. First of all, I'm not sure we can use the term end the war. Probably we can use the term stop the war. Is President Trump able to stop the war or maybe to freeze the war? Because end the war means like some definite conclusion and some agreement, but given how far away Russia's and Ukraine's position are about the final settlement, my understanding is that we may expect some ceasefire agreement or at least cessation of hostilities through official ceasefire agreement or maybe even some oral understanding that ceasefire is coming. So it will not be the end of the war. Probably it will be to stop the war or freeze the conflict. The second observation, my understanding is that any agreement, and definitely here you need agreement between Russia and Ukraine, and definitely we need some understanding between the United States and Russia. I believe that any such US-Russia understanding will not be restricted only on Ukraine. What I want to say, and I'm coming from Armenia, and we are also the post-Soviet in a post-Soviet space located in South Caucasus. My understanding is that any such understanding between United States and Russia will somehow cover also former Soviet space, because We know that officially, immediately after Russia-Georgia war in 2008, Russia declared post-Soviet space as an area of its legitimate interest, and this was disputed by the West and by the United States because both the United States and the European Union were telling that we do not accept the notion of sphere of influence. And one of the reasons behind this conflict was also this competition between Russia and the West in post-Soviet space. And at least Russia's perception that through different programs, including Eastern Partnership, NATO enlargement, European Union enlargement, association agreement with the European Union, West is trying to further decrease Russia's presence and influence in post-Soviet space. So this was one of the reasons of the conflict, and my understanding is that to at least stop the war or freeze the conflict, Russia probably will ask about some understanding. I'm not sure we can use the term agreement because agreement means signing a document, but probably some understanding about the West and Russia relations in the post-Soviet space. But the second issue which I would like to raise, from my perspective, like why Mr. Trump is interested to at least stop the war in Ukraine, or as Mr. Trump says, that he will able even to end the war in Ukraine. Of course, we may assume that yes, United States would not like to be distracted on Eastern Europe because we all know that number one priority, foreign policy priority for President Trump would be China. And this also was the case for first term of President Trump, 2017-2020, when Trump launched trade wars with China, imposed tariffs, and also what we heard during the campaign. I think number one priority for United States is China. And from my understanding, somehow from President Trump's perspective, ending the war or stopping the war in Ukraine should somehow be related with growing competition and tensions between United States and China. And I don't exclude that potentially President Trump believes or would like to do opposite what US President Nixon and Kissinger did in early 1970s. What I mean, we all know that Nixon and Kissinger, they went to China in early 1970s. At the end of the day, there was some sort of agreement with China that China will become more and more anti-Soviet, while the United States will support China, allowing to get investments, technologies, money, and also this was one of the reasons for this astonishing Chinese economic development in late 20th century and early 21st century. Now, as President Trump believes that the key, if not enemy, but at least key competitor for United States is China and not Russia, because many Americans are telling that strategically or in a long-term perspective, Russia more or less will be declining power, giving economy, giving demography and other factors. So probably I believe that President Trump would not like to compete with China in a situation when Russia slowly but steadily are becoming the junior partner of China. We all see the dynamic between Russia and China. We understand that after getting these tens of thousands of sanctions from the West, Russia was forced to fully turn into China, to sell Gulf oil to China, and also to receive technologies and everything from China. So probably from President Trump's perspective, it's better to compete or confront China without having Russia as a ally or junior partner of China. Because if you combine Chinese technologies, demography, and money with Russian resources and Russian military technology, it will become quite dangerous mix for the United States. So potentially, I see some contours of how to stop the war. Again, I'm not sure we can speak about ending the war because I am afraid the conflict will continue for decades, and maybe Trump will able to stop the war. And of course, no guarantees what may happen 5, 10, or 15 years from now. But what probably President Trump will try to do is to stop the war in Ukraine and using this possibility of stopping the war in Ukraine also as a leverage or as a bait to offer Mr. Putin some changes in Russia-China so-called friendship without limits. So I see a little bit a bigger deal. We are stopping the war in Ukraine. We are not stopping the conflict. And potentially, of course, conflict may reignite after 2030, after 2036. But also this somehow should deal first with post-Soviet space, including South Caucasus, trying to have better rules of conduct of the United States, West, and Russia in post-Soviet space, and probably will somehow impact Russia-China relations. Of course, nobody anticipates that Russia will become Chinese enemy, but I don't exclude that the United States at least would like to see no further development in Russia-China strategic partnership, because I don't believe there is any alliance yet, but also we cannot exclude that at the end of the day, Russia and China may end up with alliance. So within these contours, let's stop the war in Ukraine. Let's somehow fix rules of conduct of the West and Russia in post-Soviet space, and also some changes in Russia-China relations. So within this triangle, I don't exclude that Mr. Trump will be able to stop the war, and I agree with time frame of respectful ambassador that most probably by the end of 2025, either we will see the end of active hostilities, or we have to accept that President Trump will fail in his efforts, and in this case, hostilities may continue further in 2026 or even beyond. And as a last word, I even don't exclude that for whatever reasons, Russia will reject or will not accept President Trump's vision how to stop the war in Ukraine. Then probably President Trump will even increase the military, financial, or whatever support to Ukraine, trying to use this as a leverage on Russia. So interestingly, I think in either by the end of 2025, we will see war is stopped, conflict is frozen. Well, conflict is there, but it's frozen. Or by the end of 2025, we may see even further escalation. Thank you, and I'm looking forward for discussion, remarks, and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pogosyan. That is actually very, very useful, and I would like to agree with almost many of the things that you have mentioned. I think you have carried forward the opening remarks in a very good way, and there are 4 or 5 main points that you have made, which are very interesting. And the main point being that Ukraine is part and parcel of a much bigger picture. You talked about the triangle of countries. I would like to also extend this to triangle of many other issues coming together. Ukraine, in some sense, is more is a symbol of something which is much bigger than just a territorial war or a conflict. And your distinction between stoppage and ceasefire and cessation with ending is very correct and extremely relevant. So now with this, may I request the next speaker on the panel, who I would like to invite. Let me just check who is it. Abhinav, would you like to guide me on who is the next speaker on the panel, please?
You can invite anyone.
Okay, well, so is there anyone who would like to actually go first? Mr. Niazi, or would you like to go first?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Perfect. Yeah. So thank you for inviting me to speak on this matter. Actually, I will second most of Benjamin's points that he made, and would like to focus more on the outside factors rather than looking at the conflict, just from the zoom in perspective. So how did we get here? And I'm sure that we have heard some of the statements that President Trump made in terms of like ending the war, and the first day that he assumes office, which I would like to get at. But so there's no doubt that we are living in a world now that the unipolar moment that was created after the Cold War has ended, and we are seeing a emergence of the middle powers, countries such as Iran, North Korea, to some extent, one can argue some countries in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia. So there is this change in the world order that necessitates Washington to recalibrate its foreign policy and its approach towards some of its allies in Europe, but also in some other regions around the world. And one of those allies or partners, one can argue, is Ukraine. I wouldn't be surprised. I say this to say that I'm not surprised by some of the statements that President Trump is making. Most of them is likely related to these changing dynamic that we see in the world order that necessitates him to take, this course of action. So I just wanted to highlight that first. So with this, how the one of the major change, as Benjamin mentioned, is the rise of China and the great power competition with China. And that, I think, is the #1 foreign policy priority for Washington. That will play a very huge role in how Trump will approach the situation in Ukraine. We have seen in the last few years, 5 to 10 years, that Washington has been trying to mitigate or to respond to the need to the rise of China, the great power competition. It's trying to restrain itself and hand over some regional matters to regional players. We have seen that in the Middle East, the way Washington navigated that situation is essentially increasing its strategic partnership with countries such as UAE and Saudi Arabia, and try to restrain itself from the Middle East. I mean, we saw the recent statement with the fall of Syria, Trump saying that the US doesn't have to do anything with that. It's not our problem. So it's trying to give these matters to local players, regional players to deal with them. And the same goes through with Europe. Europe is no longer, I think, in terms of allyship, is no longer that there is a change in the way Washington will see some of the countries in Europe, and to that end, it may restrain itself to focus more on Asia. So that's the second issue that will that I'm sure that he will take into consideration as he deals with Ukraine. In terms of Benjamin made a great point about Washington trying to ensure that that Russia and China does not align too closely, that will create a problem for Washington in the great power competition with China. That's a very valid point. But I also want to note that Washington is also careful, or try to thread the needle, that if it gets too close, or if it pushes the Ukraine issue under the rug, that will turn some European partners off. And we have seen that some countries in Europe have increased their sort of relations, or have held talks with China. So he's also trying to mitigate a scenario where some countries in Europe would increase its ties with China. So that will also have some ramification. So on one hand, he's trying to balance or respond to a closing of ties or a strategic partnership between Russia and China that would create challenges for him, but also he is worried that he also wants to keep, that base of support that he has in Europe. So now, focusing on Ukraine, what he will do with Ukraine, I second Benjamin's opinion. It's not about ending the conflict, but stopping the conflict. And he, in his campaign, ending the Ukraine war was a very major slogan. So I do believe that he will do something about Ukraine. I think that he will get some sort of deal, but I'm very pessimistic about that deal actually producing a positive outcome for Ukraine or to end the war. It may be a very easy fix for Trump, but it will have a very long, negative long-term implications for Ukraine, just because the situation is like so complicated that it's almost impossible to get it resolved. He says, the first day when he assumes office, but even if he gets a deal out in like a year, I think that will be very difficult. How he will do it, and this is all speculations from my understanding, that he will essentially go to Zelensky and ask him that, that the territories that has been lost, that he should take the loss for the matter of ending the conflict. And if he doesn't agree to that, he will say that no more aid for Ukraine. So that's number one. And then he will go to Putin and essentially telling Putin that the territories that you have taken will be yours. There obviously will be some negotiations about, there might be some back and forth on whatever they agree on. But if he doesn't agree, he will threaten him with more sanctions or even with further aid to Ukraine. So this will somehow lead to sort of freezing the conflict. There is a possibility that they will that Ukraine will ask for security guarantees. But again, the US had granted security guarantee for Ukraine in the past, and they did not commit to that. So what that security guarantee means is very unclear. And I don't think that it will hold for a very long time. So that's another issue. Yeah, there is some. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I
we
think
can.
someone has.
There's some disturbance, but we can hear you.
Okay. I think Mariam Niazi has the mic. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, so the situation looks, it's very complicated. I think that it's possible that Trump will take some deal out. The conflict will be frozen. But I wouldn't be surprised if this reignites soon after Trump leaves office. Because this is what happened, like when Trump assumed office in 2017, he did put some pressure on Putin, and Putin essentially did not take any further action for the next 4 years that he was there. But the moment that he left, he again, went with his plan of like, further aggression. It's possible that he will take some deal out of this just for his political reasons, but I wouldn't be surprised if this will continue to reignite once the next president assumes office. And with that, I would like, if there are any other questions, I would love to discuss it later, but I think I will end it here.
Thank you, Mr. Niazi. That's excellent. I noticed that you began with the whole question of the rise of China as the primary foreign policy threat to the United States, and that would determine a lot of what we might see in the next few months. And of course, you also have emphasized the nature of the conflict, about the dangers of reigniting and the complexity of any agreement that may be reached. But the fact is that global leaders, it's their job to deal with complexities, and I am frankly of the view that the more complex an issue, the more leaders enjoy solving them. So it's not as if they love to get their hands dirty and convert the greatest adversity into some kind of opportunity. So I think that's the stuff of political leaders. What I would suggest is maybe we can get the European view first before we finally get the Ukrainian view, if that is okay with everyone. So could I request from Europe, I think Mr. Marian Duris, Europe is going to play a very, very important role. I think they are caught in a difficult situation. So let's hear him, and maybe we have at the end listen to our Ukrainian colleague, Ms. Natalia Butskaya. Mr. Duris, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Saran. As well, I thank you to Mr. Pandya, Ms. Kenta, and all precious colleagues here for this possibility to be here. At first, I would like to touch shortly the topic what you, Mr. Ambassador, mentioned in your introduction, and it's the call between Mr. Scholz and Mr. Putin, because I have few remarks about from the European viewpoint. We can say the US elections had significant impact on the stability and the fall of the current German government. So talks between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin about Ukraine, we can see in this sense. And it is something that Olaf Scholz would not have dared to do before the collapse of his government. They spoke for almost an hour on Friday, so this is a kind of signal or reflection of the changing political and economic reality in Germany and in Europe, which is again related to the political change in the United States. In the conversation, Mr. Scholz, according to a statement from the German government, called on Russia to end the conflict, withdraw troops, and to be ready to negotiate in order to achieve a just and lasting peace. The Kremlin responded that in the call initiated by the German side, Putin told Scholz that any agreement to end the military operation should take into account the security interests of the Russian Federation, should be based on new territorial reality, and most importantly, should address the root causes that caused the conflict. And since the EU's course to, we can say, copy the US sanctions policy towards Russia has caused Germany to stagnate due to a deteriorating economy, living standards, as well as complication in domestic politics. So it seems that Mr. Scholz decided to reach out Russian president in the hope that he could lure him into talks that would eventually lead to some kind of ceasefire or peace. Such a scenario would benefit Scholz in internal politics because there will be new elections in February or March. So it would improve his image and perhaps lead to better political prospects. Because Germany, we know, it's the second largest sponsor of Ukraine today, and people, we can say, had quite enough of it. Even in relevant polls, Germans said that 59% of them were in favor of a phone conversation between Scholz and Putin, while 26% were against, and 15% could not say. Another level is that this is not just a dilemma at the German and European level, but there is also political party level, and this stems mainly from the broad opinion of Social Democratic Party of Olaf Scholz, so that the conflict should not be escalated. And what is still interesting in the July study by the European Council on Foreign Relations says that Europeans do not believe in Ukrainian victory. 1/3 to half say that the conflict will end with an agreement, and 31% consider a Russian victory the most likely. So it seems that the former German chancellor, influenced by Trump's election victory and his own downfall, has decided to communicate with the Russian president and is now exploring the Kremlin's flexibility towards a compromise that will allow him and his country to better prepare for this kind of future. From Russian perspective, Scholz's initiative has broken the ice with the West and could pave the way for more official dialogue with other leaders who have so far refused to talk to Putin in days before. Now I would like to go to general remarks about the main question, if Donald Trump will end the Russia-Ukraine war. This is a very broad question, so I'm glad to clarify at least some details of it. Mr. Trump said he would end the war within 24 hours, right? So there was a campaign, let's take those 24 hours with a grain of salt. Mr. Donald Trump is expected to, yes, it's expected he will prioritize ending the war in Ukraine. And since the summer, there have been hints in the analytical space that he could use several tools to end the war, which we can summarize in the following way. If Zelensky refuses to freeze the conflict, he will be cut off from aid. And if the Russian president refuses the conditions, then aid to Ukraine will be increased. But again, this is verbal level that is exaggerated so that the conditions can eventually be discounted for some compromise. If we see very current rhetoric, so Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky actually in France personally rejected Trump's call for an immediate ceasefire, but then he developed the same idea, making it clear that he does not want to stop the fighting without security guarantees, under which he imagines either NATO membership or the deployment of Western troops in Ukraine. This means that Zelensky's position, at least publicly declared, has not changed in significant way compared to what he has been saying for several weeks when he declared his readiness to end the war on the front line in exchange for NATO membership. Kremlin's position has also not changed much. In response to Trump's ceasefire proposal, it stated that it was ready for negotiations, but on the basis of so-called Istanbul agreements from summer 22, where I think Ukraine's neutrality was enshrined. In addition, the Russian Federation has consistently stated that the terms of the end of the war announced by Vladimir Putin in June 24 remain in force. In addition to neutrality, there were a number of other things at stake. The requirement that Ukraine hand over to Russia the territory of 4 regions under Russian control, the lifting of sanctions, so-called denazification, etc. The Kremlin has also repeatedly stated that Russia is against the presence of foreign troops in Ukraine. If we go to the topic of possibility of Trump's plan or how it can look like, so I think it was the Wall Street Journal where some anonymous official was quoted, and here I would say this is quite interesting information that a demilitarized zone along the line is planned in Ukraine where military forces would patrol. So it is possible in this scenario that the United States would want to implement and pay. If we see some European institutions or national representatives in Europe, they would probably comply with some of them. They would comply with this American demand. Another question is who will be in the U.S. executive, because that also plays a role here. For example, the 4 most important representatives are proposed as National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. We have Secretary of State Marco Rubio. We have Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe. The first 2 can be, by some media or some analysts, labeled as war hawks, whose criticism of aid to Ukraine was based only on the fact that after this aid, the United States does not have the money to protect the southern border. They did not mind the aid for other reasons. On the contrary, Waltz proposed lifting restrictions on the Ukrainian use of American weapons and tightening sanctions against Russia. And Mr. Rubio is similarly set up to Mr. Waltz. As for Mr. Hegseth, he said that if Ukraine can defend itself, great, but he does not want Western intervention that would provoke a reaction. He means Russian reaction, of course. This is, I would say, pragmatic approach. And Mr. Ratcliffe, who served as a director of intelligence in the end of Trump's first term, was, for example, very critical of how the agencies viewed and analyzed China. He argued that analysts have one standard for assessing Russian influence and another one for assessing Chinese influence, which he meant was the Russian influence is overestimated and Chinese influence is forgotten. So These are the nominations, these foursome, who are divided on the topic of Ukraine, but they agree on China. Yes, sure, there are many variables, like Russia, that may not agree with Trump's moves. Trump is ultimately a businessman who will want a return his investment and will not want a kind of scenario of escape from Ukraine similar to Biden's escape from Afghanistan. This also has to do with the topic of extraction of natural resources, with the land which is bought in the Ukraine by foreign entities, but also with the forces that has some type of influence on US foreign policy, regardless on which party or president controls the apparatus. So to sum it up, Trump's plan is real in case if the right conditions are set, if it is acceptable to all parties involved, and especially those the biggest say at the table. And it also makes sense given the Trump's foreign policy priority, which is becoming China. And here, as I predicted before, it will be important for the Americans to get rid of the burden, which in this sense is the Ukraine battlefield, to shift this burden to Europe, where some not so sovereign representatives will probably not. And thus the United States will have free hands and more capacity to target in the Pacific. So this is the possible scenario, and these were my very short considerations, which are based on development, on situation, geopolitical power of actors, and mainly on knowledge of European or Euro-Atlantic politics, EU politics, and the national level of politics in Europe. So thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Duris. Excellent insight from the European perspective. You know, people say that it's important to listen to Ukraine, to Russia, but I think it's actually in the Trumpian world extremely important to listen to Europe, because I think Europe is in some very ironical and paradoxical way going to feel the full impact and the heat of any Trump approach to this particular conflict, and it'll have global ramifications. But I should have mentioned earlier, I forgot, but maybe I'll pose the question to you and you can think about it. Since all speakers have spoken about the primacy of the China issue in Trump's calculations, I would actually like to ask you a little more about how Europe would fit into this new or this Trumpian worldview about China, because the European approach and assessment of China in terms of the present and the future seems to be obviously very different from how it looks at Russia, number one. But number two, how much will Europe play the part in a Trumpian China policy? Will Europe be as forthcoming as United States under Trump when it comes to meeting the so-called China threat, as let's say President Trump would like Europe to? Or do you think he will find Europe to be a reluctant partner in dealing with his primary fundamental issue and geopolitical contest with China? So I'll just leave that with you. Maybe we can come back to it. And maybe now I think we should really hear the views from Ukraine, and I would actually invite Ms. Natalia Butseska for her comments. You have the floor. Please do go ahead.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me. It's a big pleasure to be here and to share Ukrainian vision about Trump's position. And I would start Donald Trump's pre-election statement about quickly ending the war ran into the reality of how to achieve this. Clearly, the president-elect is beginning to realize this. After his ambitious claim to end the war in 24 hours during an interview with Meet the Press a few days ago, Trump stated he is actively trying to end the war if I can. And adding that Ukraine can possibly expect less military aid from the US when he returns to the office. On the one hand, Trump's desire to end the war allies with Ukrainians' interest in ending a war of attrition and quickly restoring peace on its territory. On the other hand, Trump's aspiration to find a simple and quick solution to end the war poses the risk of a temporary pause before the next conflict, and it appears to be a short-term solution achieved at Ukrainians' expense. Donald Trump has not yet revealed his strategy, but has only emphasized that he's formulated a concept of peace for Ukraine. However, based on his personal statements and representatives of his team, his concept involves significant concession from Ukraine instead of push Russia to withdraw its army from territory of Ukraine. It includes freezing the front line and creating a demilitarized zone nearly 1,300 kilometers long. This would leave approximately 20% of Ukraine's territory currently occupied by Russia under Russian control. Additionally, the US side does not foresee Ukrainians' NATO membership within the next 10 or even 20 years. The reduction in military aid mentioned by Donald Trump is also an element that exerts additional pressure on Ukraine. As for Russia, no conditions have been proposed so far to compel its leadership to consider the increasing cost of its aggression against Ukraine. On the contrary, Donald Trump's statements provide the Kremlin with confidence that it can secure the most favorable terms for itself. In essence, we are witnessing a repetition of the situation after 2014, when Western partners agreed to sacrifice Ukrainians' interests in favor of Russia for the sake of illusory peace. However, this ultimately led to a harsher and more brutal war. After a meeting in Paris with the president of Ukraine on December 7th, Donald Trump stated that Russia and Ukraine must immediately cease fire and start negotiations. Ukraine aims to demonstrate to Donald Trump its interest in ending hostilities as quickly as possible, but insists on achieving a just peace. President Zelensky has adjusted his rhetoric regarding ending the war with Russia and returning to the 1991 borders. He stated that at present, Ukraine does not have the capability to reclaim occupied territories in a military manner, so the country must focus on ending the active phase of the war and diplomatically restoring the occupied territories. For the Ukrainian government, obtaining effective security guarantees is now more crucial. These guarantees would ensure Ukrainians' survival as a state and prevent a new military invasion by Russia after the conflict is frozen. In response to Trump's call, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov states that Russia is ready for an immediate end to the war, but on the conditions outlined by Putin in June. Marianne mentioned about this. This includes recognizing Crimea and 4 Ukrainian regions, which Russia does not fully control, as Russian territories. Ukrainians' renunciation of NATO membership and a series of restrictions on Ukrainians' military forces, capabilities, and partnerships that significantly curtail its rights as a sovereign state. Essentially, the Kremlin is presenting terms that would lead to Ukrainians' capitulation. To achieve its objectives, Russia, despite heavy human losses, is attempting to seize more Ukrainian territory and push Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk region before Trump's inauguration. It is also escalating tensions through nuclear blackmail, including the demonstrative launch of a medium-range hypersonic ballistic missile capable of carrying nuclear warheads against Ukrainian cities. This is being done to strengthen Russia's negotiation position and pressure the West to withdraw its support for Ukraine. Aiding the war or even achieving a ceasefire from Russia in the near future is impossible without without agreeing to compromise Ukrainians' interest. Concessions to Russia would further confirm the weakness of the West, unable to protect the rules-based international order and its partners. This would also undermine Trump's and his team's aspiration to resolve global conflicts and avoid a third world war. A lack of decisive opposition to Russia and inability to defend Ukraine will encourage the Kremlin to pursue further aggression against Ukrainians' neighboring states, to expand Russia's sphere of influence in Central and Eastern Europe, reminiscent of the Soviet Union era. Before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin had already demanded that NATO's borders be rolled back to their 1997 positions. Additionally, this would set a precedent for other authoritarian regimes to use force against weaker nations. Trump's ambitions to quickly end the war in Ukraine, to shift the US focus to China, is fundamentally enslaved. Situation in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia are interconnected. China is a beneficiary of the Russian-Ukrainian war. It is also closely studying Russia's experience and observing the best response to this aggression. Just as the US chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan signaled the weakness of the West and emboldened Putin to act aggressively against Ukraine, a failure to defeat Ukraine would send a signal to Beijing, encouraging it to act more aggressively toward Taiwan and to increase coercion in the region in general. We must also take into account that North Korea has become a part of the Russia-Ukrainian conflict, and this will have a significant impact on the security situation on the Korea Peninsula. This is why Ukrainian authorities and many of Ukraine's European partners try to convince Donald Trump that Ukraine must enter negotiation from a position of strength. This involves providing Ukraine with sufficient quantities of various types of weapons, including long-range missiles, without restriction on targeting sites within Russia territory, to halt the advance of Russian forces. Another crucial factor is inviting Ukraine to join NATO. This would send a clear message to Putin that the West is not intimidated by his threats and is ready to support Ukraine in its resistance to Russian aggression. However, there is currently no consensus among NATO member states on this decision. Furthermore, the Trump team's focus on so-called concerns about Putin's reaction to NATO expansion significantly delays this prospect for Ukraine. At present, both Russia and Ukraine are trying, each in their own way, to influence Trump and sway him toward a more favorable position. Russia is attempting it through increasing the level of escalation, while Ukraine is pursuing active negotiation with Trump's team and with President elected personally. To sum up, by the end of January, Trump is expected to demonstrate how he plans to fulfill his promise to end the Russia-Ukrainian war as the US president. Clearly, under the current circumstance, achieving a complete end to the war is impossible. The focus might instead be on establishing a ceasefire, which Trump's team could present as a negotiated agreement and a personal success for him as a mediator. In the short term, this could bring political dividends to the president elected, but in the medium term, such an agreement could harm the security interests of the West and Central and Eastern Europe. Therefore, at this stage, it is crucial for Ukrainian authorities and European partners to convince Trump and his team that supporting Ukraine aligns with the US national security interest. I will end on this, and we will try to discuss another questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Utska, for your comments. Clearly, all eyes are on Ukraine and the position it is going to take, and the views that are being discussed within Ukraine on not just the war, but as you said, a post-war scenario and what it is going to mean. So I would only say, listening to everyone, that the question is going to be, what is the price that Russia or Putin is ready to pay for ending or seizing or stopping the war or a ceasefire? I mean, clearly, I agree that it has to be seen in a global context, not just in the limited territorial context of Ukraine, which is, of course, the most important for Ukraine and for Ukrainians. But from the discussion point of view, if it is going to be part of a larger picture in the mind of the president-elect, for example, will Putin sacrifice his China card for the sake of peace with the United States? Is that the price which President Trump is going to demand from President Putin? So to ask him to make the most painful of sacrifices on the global landscape. So this is one question, I think, which maybe we should all also reflect upon a little bit. I think we now should hear the viewpoint from Moscow, and we have, I think I noticed Dr. Sergei Markadonov, who seems to have joined us, and I welcome him. But I, unfortunately, with my utter regret, have to say that I have to leave this extremely interesting discussion, but I certainly look forward to following it up either in the next few days and to listen to all the comments which I would have missed otherwise. But I beg your indulgence, and unfortunately I have to leave. I have something else, and I will miss the rest of the conversation, but not without making sure that I hear it either through the recording or otherwise, and then maybe have a follow-up with all of you, and of course with Abhinav. Abhinav, if you really don't mind, and with your permission, I would like to leave, but not before thanking all the panelists for their views. And I wish that this discussion actually goes deeper into the issues that we have touched upon. But let me thank all of you for your comments and for joining this conversation. So Abhinav, thank you so much. Pardon me, I have to leave.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sarab. Thank you for joining today and delivering special remarks and sharing the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Look forward to see you again.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have Dr. Sergei Markadonov. Over to you, Dr. Sergei.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes, perfectly fine. Loud and clear.
How much time will I have to represent my viewpoints?
10 to 12 minutes for your opening remarks. After that, we'll have
10 to 12 minutes. Okay. Yes. My request just now, because I should leave our conversation. Unfortunately, I am interested to be engaged in a more active way, but my air flight will not wait specially for me. I'm not president or prime minister. This is why now I will offer you to submit some of my viewpoints, to share my insights with you, and then I will open for your questions, comments. I will be ready to respond, and then I will leave you, okay?
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me start with the name of your roundtable discussion, Will Trump and the Russia-Ukraine war. I understand all the reasons behind the name of this roundtable discussion, but at the same time, it looks like a little bit a PR provocative thing. It's understandable for me that Trump is not wizard. If this crisis evolved previously, if it developed for at least a couple of decades, yeah, it's impossible to imagine that one person, even if we accept his exclusive role in the world politics, will stop the war. And the most important question we should take into account that Ukrainian problem is multi-layered. It's not restricted by the Ukrainian territory or competition or rivalry between Russia and Ukraine, their territorial shapes and so on. It's part of the greater puzzle. I completely agree with Ambassador who left our roundtable discussion that it's multi-layered. The problem of Ukrainian identity, the problem of Russian-Ukrainian disputes going back to the at least early 90s, and it's a problem of the Russian-Western relations. Because we can imagine that this war will be stopped maybe in a month or 2 months. The basic question, what will be about results? Whom will we treat like winner? Because it's a very difficult question, by the way, because for Ukrainian, maybe the winning result will be restoration of territorial integrity, withdrawal of Russians from Crimea or Donbass and so on. But Russia means different evaluation of the victory and potential results. And this question is also divided into some points, some layers for Russia, domestic, foreign policy, and so on. It's also necessary to understand. And I suppose the key problem in our relationship with the West is different goal settings. Because American administration, Trump is not exclusion, try to focus on concrete issue, not touching the context behind the crisis. Let me briefly observe the 3 windows opened for normalization between the West and Russia after the collapse of the USSR. The first, briefly, of course. The first one was opened in 1991, when USSR collapsed and when the Cold War was over. And at that time, Russia believed in very brief integration with the Western integration structures. And of course, Russia believed in economic aid from the Western side. But we disappointed in many aspects because Russia was not treated like equal partner in this world game. Russia was treated like lost power, and winner-takes-all principle dominated. The second window was opened after 9/11, when the challenge and threat of international terrorism was against both United States and Russia, but again, different sets of goals. Because Russia hoped that these anti-terrorism strategies will be multinational, multilateral, but United States treated like instrumental thing in order to intervene in domestic agenda of some countries for change regime and so on. As a result, August War of 2008, as a result of intervention of the West in Yugoslavian things and post-Soviet ones. And third, window was opened after August War of 2008, when the West and Russia decided to provide so-called reset politics. And again, different sets of goals. For the United States, is what kind of discrete thing. And now, it was not an invitation to resolve all the problem on the comprehensive basis. And now, following, for example, Kit Kellogg plan, published, released in April, but now it was kind of refreshed, yeah? It's restricted the problems. For example, plan of Kellogg, who became special advisor to President Trump, offered idea of suspension of NATO status for Ukraine for 10 years. What's after? It's important, by the way. We will wait for 10 years and then Ukraine will be NATO member. Don't forget that Russia treated NATO enlargement like challenge because NATO is a military bloc. It's not NGO supportive organization. It's not foundation for protection of wildlife. It's a military bloc, again, with military intelligence structure, with some challenges and so on. Moreover, after the end of the Cold War, NATO used force many times in order to change borders, to change status quo everywhere, Middle East, Balkans, even the post-Soviet space. This is why we should have guarantees, by the way. And basic prerequisites behind the escalation of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict in 2022 were behind these offers. It's a problem. For us, it's necessary to have guarantees. And, of course, Russia is interested to be part of the discussion on the European, on the global level. As for now, we see most of efforts from the Western side to marginalize the Russia's role. You will lose or we will win. And okay, one more point, very important in our context. I joined you a little bit later than all other participants, but I heard a lot of mentions of Vladimir Putin. It's necessary to understand, taking into account the role of Vladimir Putin in Russian decision-making process, strategies and so on, Russian foreign policy is not Putin's foreign policy. It's a key mistake of the West, identifying policy of Russia with one person. Russia demonstrated its dissatisfaction to NATO enlargement, NATO-centric security system, and violation of the principles of indivisibility of security since at least December 1994. Speaking at CSE Forum in Budapest on December 5, 1994, 4 days after publication of Brussels communique, proclaimed their NATO enlargement first. 4 years after, not 4 days, sorry, not 4 years, 4 days after, Boris Yeltsin, the first president of Russia, declared the replacement of Cold War by Cold Peace and offered ideas of inclusive security system, not exclusive. We were not satisfied by NATO-centric, prerogative, privileged principles of security. And Ukraine in this context, yeah, I understand all the feelings of Ukrainians. I have a lot of friends in this country and even relatives and so on. But now let's put all the lyrics out of the bracket. But Ukraine is only one part of this greater landscape. Okay, let's imagine everything will be resolved in Ukraine. What's about Abkhazia? What's about South Ossetia? Do conflicts really influencing on our domestic security in Russia's North Caucasus, parts of my country? It's a problem because United States in 2011 proclaimed those territories as occupied by Russia, but we have different approach from it. Many problems in post-Soviet countries were treated by the West like only traces of the Russian aggression, but it's oversimplification because the problem of most of post-Soviet countries, they had different identities within one, and different parts of those countries perceived security, personal and safety and state security in different way from NATO mainstream. Belonging to NATO mainstream did not mean and does not mean them prerogative or privileged people in comparison with groups oriented on Russia or Eurasian projects and so on and so on. This is why, resolving the Ukrainian puzzle, we should address to those problems. Problems of identity, self-determination in the post-Soviet countries, and finally, the problems of the USSR collapse. Because the problems of the USSR collapse were perceived by the West like great democratic breakthrough, but in reality, they were identified with conflicts, refugees, and of course external interventions, because the collapse of the USSR was accompanied by crisis of legality and legitimacy. because it was provided not on the strict legal rules, but based on the principles of political reasonability. It's a problem, by the way, again. It does not mean Russia should win everything and everywhere, but it should be subject of the discussion. What do we see now? I am editor-in-chief of the influential scientific journal in my country. 4 members of my editorial board left the journal, guys from United States, France, and so on. I never made a pressure on them to accept Russia's viewpoint. It was their choice, but it was manifestation on my modest level of behavior of the Western politicians, thinkers, influential thinkers, first of all, of course, academicians. No readiness to discuss the problems. No readiness to discuss. As a result, we will have escalation. Okay, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. What's about Transnistria? What's about European security in general? Again, Ukrainian conflict is a very important point in this context, but only one. When we discussed 10 years ago implementation of Minsk Accords, and many guys that time from US and European Union countries arrived in Moscow, we met in my university, MGIMO, we discussed a lot those things. And that time I especially underlined that resolution of the Ukrainian conflict had 2 dimensions at least: international, regional, and bilateral, Russian-Ukrainian, all the level. If we will follow only one, without second, third, fourth level, no real solution. This is why, responding to your question, final remarks, I respond in your question, we should take into account our understanding of results, benefits, potential role of Russia in the global and European security, and other conflict resolutions. With no recipes on these issues, no solution, I suppose. With Trump or without Trump. I understand the role of the United States. I'm not belonging to some of my competitors who say about decay of United States immediately. No. Even now, United States claims and is one of the most influential actors in the world. And many things are depending on will of Trump and his team. But again, he is not wizard. Many things are systemic, not restricted by one personality. And of course, a resolution of European security puzzles is not game of 2, gamble of 2 pleasant or unpleasant gentlemen. It depends on your seat, Trump and Putin. It's wider, systemic. It's necessary to understand. And this is why I especially underline this issue. Let me finish. I understand all the restrictions and limits. It's not lecture for the students. And then I am ready to respond to your comments, answers, comments, questions. Sorry, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sergey, for your excellent summing of the Russian position and also highlighting the nuances which make the entire issue very complex and the kind of solutions that we need. I certainly agree with you that the issue is much deep-rooted, it's systemic, and it cannot be solved by one person and his will or his, I would say, whim, whatever. But yes, I mean, definitely, I mean, we are looking at solutions. So now I leave the house open to the questions. I'll just ask my first question to you. So, in case if there is any negotiation in the future, after Trump takes over, what would be the main position that Russia would take? Because we have read a lot about Russia holding very firmly about retaining Crimea and the 4 provinces, those which are contested. But will Mr. Trump agree to that, and to what extent Mr. Putin, would like to go ahead with holding that demand?
Okay, maybe we will collect some questions. I will respond. I understand your question about negotiations and the approach of Russia to territorial issues like most painful.
Perfect. So if you have more questions, we can, yeah. Yes,
I
you
prefer
can.
to collect all of them and then to react.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Shresht, would you like to read your question?
May I speak here? Is it
Yes,
good?
yeah,
Yeah.
you can speak.
Greetings to everyone. I'm Shresh Sharma, research intern from Center of Geoeconomics for the Global South. My question is directed towards Dr. Sergey. How do you, sir, how do you see the impact of, how do you see the information warfare going between Russia and Ukraine, as people have been consistently analyzing the situation which has been going on between the two countries in terms of information warfare on social media and over the internet? How do you feel it has influenced the public sentiment in Russia and it has impacted the world? Thank you so much.
Okay. Let me
Any other
respond.
question?
Oh, maybe one more question. Yeah, please.
Yes. Yes, Dr. Wani, please read your question.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Yeah.
Sir, my question is, given the geopolitical contestations in former Soviet Union, how far China has been successful in managing the perception of Central Asian republics, especially in Eurasia? We see China is intruding in Eurasia as well as now in Caucasus, south of Caucasus, in Azerbaijan, Georgia. So how far China has been successful in gaining during this conflict in formal Soviet days? Thank you, sir.
Okay, good question and understandable. I understand that in India, the role of China is one of the most important things. And I got one question. Sorry, it was disappeared.
No, there's, I think,
I
one more
got
question.
one
I
question
can
in
read it.
chat.
I can read it.
One question in chat. Yeah, Russia's presence in the South Caucasus in case there is U.S.-Russian settlement or if Russia achieves its goals in Ukraine. Thanks. Okay, good point. Let me respond on your questions. All of them are very interesting and all of them require at least series of articles, maybe monograph. Yeah, but speaking about negotiations, we can blame Russia for many things, by the way. Yeah, but Russia was ready to follow negotiations. No special acts at my country to prohibit negotiations. Vladimir Zelensky did it. I understand public reasons, domestic reasons behind this decision. The role of public matters in Ukraine is higher than in Russia. But I cannot agree with Western narrative that this public non-governmental dimension is useful every time. I'm not sure. Yeah, Vladimir Zelensky wants to be supported inside the country, but in terms of resolution of the conflict, is not a good choice, by the way, to stop any negotiations. Let's stop negotiations because I don't like Putin. Okay, but with whom are you going to talk? With guys who left country and represent nobody in the United States or UK? Nowadays, Putin is the president of Russia. You can hate him, you can love him, as well as Xi Jinping is the head of the Chinese state. The same is with Zelensky, yeah? We should find some resolutions. If Ukraine will be ready to start talking, why not? As for Crimea and some other regions, so-called new regions of Russia, it's also necessary to understand the evolution position of Russia towards those things. In 2015, 2016, and even till February 2022, Russia never raised a question on recognition of Donetsk, Lugansk, or so-called some regions. This issue became topical only by February 2022 for many reasons. And after warfare, Russian position became harsher than previously. But similar, not the same, but similar algorithms could be traced in the South Caucasus area. Prior to August 2008, Russia never raised a question on recognition of independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. But when the position of our counterparts became harsher, Russia reacts. It's also necessary to take into account. This is why I am not sure that Russia is interested to simply freeze the conflict. It's also offer from the United States. Let's freeze the conflict. We froze it in 2014 in September, having a lot of prerogatives, by the way. in terms of warfare, in terms of strategic and tactical reasons. We failed those prerogatives in February 2015 also, freezing the conflict, but no solution. Because our partners, Germans, French, even Ukrainians, treated Minsk Accords like peace pause, not something to resolve the problem. And this is why Russia suspects that in the case of freezing conflicts, we will have something similar. No solution. Peace pause for Ukraine to strengthen its army and so on and so on. It's not interest of Russia. Interest is to resolve this problem in terms of wider discussion on the concrete topic and security in Europe on the global level. Case on Chinese success. First of all, I cannot agree completely with the position which I heard for our roundtable discussion about China's position as something identical to Russia. No, absolutely. Yeah, China and Russia shared a lot of common points. But China never recognized Russia's sovereignty over Crimea and so-called new regions of Russia. China never recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia. China is now, even now, trade partner number one for United States. Don't forget about it. China is interested to provide balanced policies. And I'm not sure that idea to conquer Taiwan is a defix of China. Sorry, no. Because if we are discussing China's successful things like Hong Kong and Macau, no military solution. I'm not sure that case of Taiwan is a defix to provide a conquest. This is why China's position is rather balanced. Why China is interested to have good partners in Eurasia? Because it's a project, One Belt, One Road, which is starting in China, will finish in Europe. This is why China should ensure loyalty or friendly attitude of neighbors, partners, and so on and so on. It's interesting case, Georgia, yeah? Because Georgia was the first country among South Caucasus ones which signed free trade agreement with China, claiming its goal to be part of NATO. And even now, Georgia never rejected ideas of Euro and Euro-Atlantic integration. The problem is concrete attitude to concrete legal acts, to opposition, and so on. But even now, Georgian Dream, ruling party in Georgia, did not reject ideas of Euro and Euro-Atlantic integration. Nevertheless, they insisted to cooperate with China. Why? For what reasons? Because China insists on territorial integrity of Georgia. This is why for Georgian leadership is important to be treated not like power playing on one side Western, but power trying to provide more or less balanced policies. This is why China is requested in some Central Asian countries as well as South Caucasus. As for Central Asia's countries, they are interested to provide anti-terrorism campaigning, being supported by China. As for Georgia, Azerbaijan, they see some traces to diversify their foreign policy and also security approach, especially Azerbaijan, which tries to have unilateral ties with Russia, Turkey, United States, China, not being engaged in some integration projects. Russia's presence in the South Caucasus. It depends again on will and wish of Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia to cooperate with Russia. Because for Russia, the most important thing is to stop any interethnic violence along the borders. Because Azeris, Armenians, Georgians are a substantial part of our own population. We have more than 1 million Armenians in Russia, more than 1 million Azeris, 500,000 Georgians. Many of them live in some important areas of Russia, like Krasnodar Krai, the third territory in terms of population, or, for example, Krasnodar Krai, or Krasnodar region, of course, Moscow. They are influential in business and so on and so on. It's also a very important case. And I see one more point. What is the likelihood of increasing? I answered. Is it okay to ask another question here in the comments? Yes, please. It's your field. I'm your guest. This is why feel free.
So we have other speakers also. So I'll ask, I request all the participants to share your questions for all the speakers, like to Dr. Sergey, Dr. Benjamin, Natalia, Omer, Marian. Okay, so please feel free to ask your question.
Okay, may I put some words? That's why after Sergey's speech, you can understand that's why Ukrainians perceive this war as a colonial war, because Russian war against Ukraine is a reflection of an empire that has lost its influence and trying to restore it using blood war. Sergei mentioned a lot of conflicts around post-Soviet territories, Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine. This conflict is because they were made by Russia to take in unrest countries around post-Soviet territories. One very important point, Russia tried to use historical claims to territories of post-Soviet countries like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and so on. But it is very bad signal because Russia also has a lot of territories which were historically belongs to Finland, to Japan, to Ukraine, like Kursk, Belgorod Oblast, and so on, and to Kazakhstan and Mongolia. So, in weakening of Russia, Russia will have a very big civilian conflict inside of its territory. And another one point, Ukrainian government highlighted a lot of time to American partners, to European partners, to global South, to so-called global South countries that Russia does not want to stop this war because it is not in interest of Russia to stop war. And our authorities try to convince Trump that freezing of this war would be break for war of Russia against NATO countries. And our neighbors and our partners like Baltic countries and Poland, they are aware that Russia will try to continue war in a few years against them because of Russian ambitions to have influence not around countries in post-Soviet territories, but around.
Dr. Natalia, I'll have to cut you short because we are running short of time. So to your comments, Dr. Sergey, I'll just request you a quick reply to Dr. Natalia's comments, and then I'll move on to other speakers also. Yeah.
Okay, first of all, thank you for this opportunity for the dialogue. If you see, I never told about empire or imperial interest or something else. All the conflicts mentioned by me were many dimensions, and first of all, they were predetermined by domestic instability in those countries, not Russian ambitions or territorial claim. As for history in our relations, believe me, it's kind of huge mistake to identify all the Russian problems or foreign policy approach with figures of Stalin, Catherine II, or someone else. Excuse me, if 80% of the Russian Black Sea Fleet were based in Sevastopol, it was not about Peter the Great or Stalin. It was about contemporary times. If our military-industrial complexes, Russian and Ukraine, were connected highly, especially prior to 2014, it was not about Peter the Great or Stalin. It was about contemporary developments. The same is with about European security and so on. And I suppose that our Western colleagues try to replace reasons and consequences. Crimea took place in 2014, but NATO enlargement started in 1994. 20 years prior to Crimea. Not Crimea provoked NATO enlargement. NATO enlargement provoking replacement of some approach of Russia are changes of status quo approach to revisionism. It's necessary also to understand. I brilliantly understand that nowadays, for our round table, we, me and Natalia personally, the problem is not with me or Natalia. Russian, Ukrainian experts will reach some consensus or something else. But one point, please, to be heard. Russia is not interested to continue war. We understood all the losses, all the problems in economy and humanitarian development and so on. But Russia is interested to have guarantees, because after the end of the Cold War, we got only enlargement, we got only development of privileged security approach, where Russia was not allowed to have its own voice for this round table, not this, but European and global. Russia objected NATO enlargement. Okay, please, guys, we heard you, please, but we will do what we want. It's impossible, guys. Please, Russian voice should be treated, Russian voice should be taken into the account. It's a goal of Russia, not continuation of the war. Every war is disastrous and tragedy. It's understandable for all adequate persons. But please ensure guarantees and voice of Russia in the choir of global security concert.
Only one question. When NATO enlargement is a big threat to Russia, why you don't start war against Finland after entering to NATO, but started war against Ukraine, which is not NATO member, which wasn't a NATO member, in the future wouldn't be NATO member? Why?
Natalia, the problem is not Finland again. The problem is wider than one country. The problem with Ukraine was ongoing conflict between 2014 and 2022. A lot of endeavors to sweep Russian presence from Ukraine, not implement Minsk Accords and so on. In the case of Finland, all those things were not existent that time. Different cases, as well as case of Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and territorial claims. Many Russian guys on the TV and so on discussed problems with Kazakhstan, but we have no warfare because Kazakhstan was not interested to transform its territory to area of rivalry between different actors. Ukraine did it, as well as Georgia previously. Not Kazakhstan, no Azerbaijan, no other countries, no Uzbekistan. They were interested to provide more or less nuanced and balanced policy. If Ukraine wants to be on the right side of history, okay, it's a choice, but we have what we have. Again, Natalia, thank you for your insights. And I value your bravery to be engaged in the conversation with Russian, because many persons in your country in Western identify us like toxic. Yeah, one cock and you will be Putinist. Yes, it's crazy, by the way. Only a good discussion will open way for better understanding. And I am grateful to my Indian colleagues for this opportunity. Maybe it's not about consensus, but the start of discussion.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sergey. You know, now I would love to continue this conversation. This is like really amazing. I wish we had more time, but with, the way we are discussing things, we can understand how complex the matter is, and Trump is definitely, going to have a hard time along with Mr. Putin and Mr. Zelensky. So with that, I would like to come to Mr. Marian, and I have a question, Marian. In case, if Mr. Trump decides to cut aid to Ukraine, okay, what would be the European reaction? And secondly, a general question about Trump's attitude towards the transatlantic security architecture. If he is not very forthcoming, and if he prefers American withdrawal from the global conflict systems, what is going to be the sentiment in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. So you have in Europe many opinions on the way how Trump will try to deal with issues around the world, and not only in Ukraine, but of course in Indo-Pacific as well and other regions. So When we mention this cutting the aid to Ukraine and what would be solution in case of Europe, we have in Europe many countries which are on the side of continuation of funding, sending weapons, sending finances to Ukraine. You have on the other side countries and representatives, mainly countries in Central Europe, like for example like Hungary, what are not in in accordance with this idea, and they are more like this Trump's idea to stop the war, whatever it costs. So you have this national level of this consideration of this opinion, and there is, okay, we can say majority of the European countries are for helping the Ukraine in the future, although the US would step back from this conflict. On the other side, you have this European Union level, where you have a European Council. There are made decisions. There are made decisions in some cases you are voting in qualified majority. In some cases you need unanimous decision. And that's the thing, or that's the point where some country can say, we will not support this point, and they will block all this stuff, all this aid, all these finances or weapons from the side of European Union to Ukraine. So there are many questions. There are many questions how the nations will stand, what positions they will have. We see changes of governments. We saw Miss Meloni government in Italy. Mr. Orban, his government is quite stable, but we can expect, for example, change in France. We can expect change in Germany, and these two countries are really significant. What about Europe's geopolitics? So I think the majority of, for example, MEPs in European Parliament, majority of countries in European Council can support the continuation of help to Ukraine, but there are possibility that some countries will block this decision. So we can just wonder what will happen, and what I think the first step must be done by a new US administration, and after we can have it more clear how Europe will behave.
Thank you, Marian. Now, before I go to Dr. Benjamin and Omer for two quick questions, I will request Natalia for a quick comment on how are Ukrainians going to feel if Trump decides to withdraw or scuttle the aid. What would be the reaction from the Ukrainian side? Just a quick reply, Natalia, because we are running short of time here.
Yes, we think that it would be very big challenge for Ukraine and Ukrainian army, because US is the main supplier of weapons to Ukraine. But I think that our European partners now understand that European autonomy is a very important thing for them. They have a little bit fear of these changes in Euro-Atlantic relations and about challenges because of war of Ukraine. But I think it would be much more hard for Ukraine. But I think that our European partners will provide support for Ukraine, and Ukraine by itself try to be more autonomous in the case of making a weapon, and in the case to change its technological approach in the war. And we are optimistic about our future, because even after 3 years, big power like Russia couldn't defeat us.
Thank you. So, Marian, you have loads of inputs to advise your European parliamentarians. Now, coming to Ben. So, Ben, yes, in case a situation, let's say this conflict stops, I'm not saying end, then Russia will have more resources and more time to devote towards the Caucasus. And given the fact that in the recent past, your government has tilted more towards the West, So how are they going to cope up with the new situation in which, Russia gets back to its turf, or its stronghold in South Caucasus? And I also want to add one more factor to this question. With the recent development in Syria, Russia knows it very well that Turkey has kind of backstabbed them. That's the word which Mr. Alexander Dugin used in one of its tweets today. So definitely Russia is going to have a different approach towards Turkey and its friend Azerbaijan. So maybe you can share some light on, how Armenia is going to cope up with the new Russian situation and how Russia would be reacting in the South Caucasus. You mute. You're on mute.
Do you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I can hear
Yes.
you. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhinav, for a very interesting question. So, first of all, I would define Armenia's foreign policy, at least in the last 2 years, till September 2022, as a Western-focused diversification. Why diversification? Because it's not only about having relations with the West. We all know about the growing partnership with India, primarily in defense area, but also there are a lot of talk about economic cooperation. We see some outreach to Gulf region, United Arab Emirates, huge trade, establishment of diplomatic relation with Saudi Arabia, but still it's Western focused because the main focus is the West. We see strategic dialogue with the United States, which was launched back in 2019, and decision in 2024 to transform it into a strategic partnership. Let's see what will happen under President Trump. And with the European Union, a lot of things happened in only last 2 years. The negotiations to sign new partnership agenda, a new document in early 2025, the launch of visa liberalization dialogue, deployment of EU mission along Armenia-Azerbaijan border, 2-year mission, February 2023, and most probably the mission will be extended for another 2-year term until February 2027, and a lot of other things. So, but also let's not forget that why and when Armenia started its foreign policy diversification. It was in September 2022 when Russia suffered humiliation in Ukraine, losing thousands of square kilometers of territory in Kharkov and Kherson region within a week. And immediately after that, Azerbaijan launched a large-scale aggression against Armenia proper. I'm speaking about event of September 13-14, 2022. And as of now, Azerbaijan controls 200 square kilometers of Armenia's territory. And we saw that due to different reasons, Russian CSTO did not what at least Armenia and Armenian public thought that they should do, because again, this was not an attack against Nagorno-Karabakh, which was never part of any guarantees from Russian CSTO. This was attack against Armenia proper. So Armenia started its diversification when there was a perception that Russia is weak in Ukraine and maybe is going to lose, and B, when it was clear that Russia, at least at that time, was not able to fully fulfill its security guarantees toward Armenia. Now, if we assume that war will be stopped, not ended, it will be stopped and frozen in Ukraine, this automatically means that Russia will have more resources for other areas, including in South Caucasus. And definitely Russia, we see that Russia is not happy with Armenia's Western-focused diversification. We hear almost on a daily basis critics against Russia, especially on EU mission. Russia accuses the EU mission that they are spying against Russia, Iran, Azerbaijan, Turkey. Russia is not happy that Armenia frozen its membership into CSTO. But if we will have more, let's say, powerful or influential Russia in the South Caucasus, and given what's happening in Georgia, we see the deterioration of Georgia-West relations, both before and especially after October 26 elections. We see protests in Georgia. Let's see how this is going to end. But if Georgian Dream is able to remain in power, at least until 2028, definitely the relations between Georgia and the West will not be the same as they were in the last 20 years. When Georgia was speaking about the Euro-Atlantic integration, and by the way, it was the Georgian Dream who in 2017 changed Georgia's constitution and put special article about Georgia's Euro-Atlantic integration. But still, relations between Georgia and the West will not be the same. So we will have a situation when so-called the potential window to the Euro will not be so open. I'm speaking about Georgia. And also we see that negotiations with Azerbaijan and negotiations with Turkey are in limbo. Many in Armenia hoped that if Armenia will accept the loss of Nagorno-Karabakh and will say to Azerbaijan, okay, enjoy Nagorno-Karabakh, I will forget about Karabakh, about ethnic cleansing of Armenians, hoping that this will result in Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization, Armenia-Turkey normalization. It will be open borders, more investments, potentially even Turkish investments into Armenia, and also potentially Turkey serving a window to reach the West in general. But this is not going to happen. There is no peace agreement, despite all the hopes that something will be signed by the end of 2023, then by COP29, then by the end of 2024. So if a window towards the West via Georgia is not as open as it was, and there is nothing breakthrough neither on Armenia, Azerbaijan, nor on Armenia, Turkey, while the potential threat of new escalation by Azerbaijan will grow in 2025, and we'll see more influential Russia in South Caucasus. So I don't exclude that Armenian government will try to adjust its foreign policy from Western-focused diversification to simply diversification. Probably we'll see Armenia's efforts to find new partners, but with less emphasis on West, on the relation with the European Union and the United States, and probably some efforts to reset relations with Russia. Will it be successful? Will the current government was able to reset relations with Russia, or Russia will say, no, I need new people in Armenia, and we'll wait for 2026 parliamentary elections? We will see. But at least I see if everything happens, like war in Ukraine is stopped, there is a no breakthrough on Armenia-Azerbaijan, Armenia-Turkey relations, and Georgian dream remains in power in Georgia with some sort of decline between relations between Georgia and the West, then probably Armenia will adjust its foreign policy diversification from Western-focused diversification to simply diversification, and B, probably efforts will be taken to reset or readjust relations with Russia.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. So now we have a last question for Mr. Omer. Omer, a quick question. So in your opinion, do you think the US is comfortable with the two core pillars of the Russian view towards the emerging world order? That is multipolarity and the civilizational states as the fundamental units of the multipolar world order. First, and second, do you think that in the US, will Trump regime see more of internal strife between his team and the deep state? Please answer. I request your comments on these two questions.
Perfect. Yeah. So in terms of the multipolarity, it is now in Washington D.C. a sort of a accepted reality of entering into a more multipolar world. And the main concern again comes back to China, the rise of China. It's less worried about Russia as like a country that will pose any challenge to the United States in the future, but very much worried about a alliance of Russia, China, potentially North Korea. But at the same time, their policy is heavily anchored on accepting this reality, but at the same time mitigating that as we enter into this new multipolar world, that they mitigate the risk of conflict, more specifically with China. How to allow China to rise, but at the same time do not pose any challenges to UN, to American interests in terms of national security, but also its economic interests around the world. And what was the second question? You're muted.
Well, we heard a lot of rumors or maybe concrete assessments about the possible internal strife between the Trump and his team on one side and the US deep state on the other side. Now, for me, I mean, definitely various scholars have defined, like John Mearsheimer and all, they've defined what the deep state means. But for me, it still remains unclear. But in your opinion, do you think that his tenure will be more of, based on internal strife, or will it be smooth?
I think that okay. So some of how it looks from outside the U.S. Is being interpreted as as this intense domestic sort of polarization. But again, that holds to some extent. It holds some truth to it. But I wouldn't be worried about that when it comes to the foreign policy. this has happened in the past and throughout history. If you look, which I'm not gonna mention specific presidents in the past, this has happened, but it was not as intense that it impacted American foreign policy. So I think that he will, this is something that he's looking very closely at in terms of how to make sure to mitigate the risks posed by internal polarization so that it doesn't impact American foreign policy. And I think that is something that will be top of his agenda, but we'll see what will happen in the next 4 years.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amit. So with this, we come to the end of this today's scintillating and exciting discussion. I wish we had more time and we could, discuss more questions, but, we are short of time and I guess, we all have other stuff to do. So I would like to thank all the participants for joining us today, and my heartfelt thanks to all the delegates, Ambassador Saran and Dr. Sarge, who left us early because of their prior engagements. So once again, my warm thanks to all of you. I look forward to see you again in one of our events, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.